At the end of this hour, new video just in of the FBI on the scene where 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was killed last month. The agents from the Tampa field office of the FBI have been there since this morning. A bureau official says they are conducting what's being called a, quote, parallel investigation into the case and focusing on whether Trayvon Martin's civil rights were violated when George Zimmerman shot him February 26. Meantime, Trayvon Martin's parents are expected to file a formal request for an investigation into state attorney Norm Wolfinger. According to the Griot.com sources, they indicate that Wolfinger overrode the effort by the lead detective to charge Zimmerman with manslaughter the night of the shooting.
I'm doing this for God. I'm doing this for Trayvon. So it just makes me press forward to know that we have to get justice for my son so that his death is not in vain.
And this all comes as the Orlando Sentinel newspaper reports it had two experts in forensic voice identification analyze the screaming heard on the 911 call the night of the shooting. Both say the voice does not belong to George Zimmerman. The grand jury is not expected to convene in this case for 8 more days. And joining me now, Marcia Clark, the lead prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson case, and she has a new book, Guilt by Degrees. Marcia, thank you for sticking around with us. We have a short amount of time, but we did ask our viewers to submit questions to you directly via us to get some answers as we wait to see what happens next. I want to get to one of the first ones. A lot of people are asking, what are some of the alternatives if there is no arrest in this case?
If there's no arrest immediately by the state authorities, excuse me, then hopefully the feds will step in and determine whether or not this is a case they can file. If there are civil rights implications here, if this is shown to be some kind of hate crime based on the remarks made by Zimmerman on the 911 tape, then the feds can certainly step in and file charges here under the 1983, that's Section 1983 Civil Rights Violation Act. If that does not happen, then the Martin family would have the ability to file a civil suit.
And I want to skip ahead. We have just a short amount of time with you, but as I mentioned, this report out of the Orlando paper that two so-called voice experts used different technology and came to the same conclusion that the person screaming in the background was not George Zimmerman. Steve Prilly submitted the question, can voice analysis of the 911 tapes conclusively determine who was screaming? And I'll follow up on that. Can that be used in court, Marcia?
Yes, I believe it can. Something like this would be subject to objection by the defense. They would certainly say this is some kind of a new scientific test that doesn't meet the standards of legal admissibility and reliability. I think ultimately the judge lets it in and lets the jury determine what weight to give this testimony. Certainly, I think it's very compelling evidence. It'll be very, very informative on the issue of whether George Zimmerman was acting in self-defense, and I think very powerful evidence for the prosecution.
And Marcia, at this point, as you well know, there's a great concern about the impact that the rallies will have, at least from George Zimmerman's attorney's perspective, how much of an influence all of this media attention will have. And Mitch Ailes wrote to us and he said, how much of an influence, if any, does the public rush to judgment have in a high-profile case like this? And he obviously believes that there is some kind of public rush to judgment here.
There may be. It's natural for people to form an opinion when they get evidence, when they get information. People are watching this story on television as it unfolds. They're forming opinions. It's a human thing. You're not going to stop people from doing that. The ultimate test when you pick a jury is not whether or not they've formed an opinion, but whether they can set that opinion aside and open their mind to the evidence that's presented in court and evaluate it fairly. If we require jurors to have no knowledge of big news stories like this before they could qualify to be on a jury, we'd never have a jury. So the legal test is, can you set your opinion aside and listen, as we all should. All of us will form opinions, but as the news continues to develop, as more information is brought to us, we have to open our minds and listen to it, evaluate it fairly. Is there going to be a problem posed by the defense in terms of a bias in the jury pool based on the rally? Certainly. The defense is going to argue that there are problems. You can't pick a fair jury. etc. But I assume that by the time this case actually goes to trial, things will be substantially calmer, and you will be able to impanel a fair jury.
Okay, and let me get this one more question in. Nicodemus Lawman submitted this one. He says, how could a self-defense claim ever be valid if one person has a gun and the other is unarmed? How did George Zimmerman have a gun when he had 3 violent arrests on records, 2 labeled domestic violence? Those are obviously 2 questions, so let me separate this first, Marcia. The notion of self-defense when one person is armed and another is not.
Well, of course, you start out now with an inequity. It's completely unfair. One person's completely unarmed, not even a knife, and the other one has a gun. Which is hugely powerful, and that is capable of inflicting lethal force at a distance. There is immediately in the mind of any rational person an unfairness to it. Could there possibly still be a valid self-defense? There possibly could.
Yeah.
If I play it out, let's say that George Zimmerman sees Trayvon reach in his pocket in a manner that's threatening, that looks like he has a gun, and then he makes a statement to George Zimmerman like, I'm going to shoot you now, something like that, then there could be, under some circumstances of that nature, a valid defense. Do I see that here? Not yet. It certainly doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to me that if there was, in fact, a confrontation and a scuffle between them, which is what has been indicated thus far, then Zimmerman had every opportunity to know that Trayvon was not armed. And in that case, the use of lethal force is completely unjustifiable.
Well, Marcia Clark, thank you so much. We had more time built in, but obviously the developing news with the president, very important as well, if not more important, certainly on a global scale here. So we will hopefully be able to get you back on and have more of your analysis as this continues with 8 more days before the grand jury convenes. Thank you. And now let me bring in MSNBC contributor Toure. You made a lot of headlines yourself this weekend. You made an appearance on CNN with Piers Morgan. A lot of talk about how this is being played out in the media. One of our questions was about a rush to judgment. You tweeted out an apology today to people who follow you. What were you apologizing for in reference to this case?
Well, I mean, what I want to do is get information about the case and seek justice for Trayvon and just for America, that the right thing happens. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if that means a conviction, but I know that we need to judge the evidence in a court of law. And if the media doesn't help push this toward that, then we may not ever get to that point of justice. And when I became part of the story and allowed it to become about ego.
And why do you say that, real quick? Because obviously the media was important, and Trayvon Martin's family points to Reverend Al Sharpton and so many others whose names we don't know who pushed for this. And we would not be at this point had there not been an intervention, had there not been people who were brave enough to hear the cries of this family. So there's no negating the role that Twitter, the media, Reverend Al, and others have played in this, because we would not be here. But what are you apologizing for?
Well, I was angry that a certain amount of misinformation was allowed to come over the airwaves unchallenged, and Piers was allowing somebody to just tell whatever story they wanted to. It was basically a PR stunt for the family, or allowing sort of...
Who did he allow on, in your opinion? I don't want to get too caught up in this, but since you're referring to...
Robert Zimmerman, George Zimmerman's brother, who, as NBC News has reported, has not spoken to George in years. He never was able to say, I spoke to George and he said this, that, and the other. So, you know, the whole interview was problematic, and there was many questions that needed to be asked that were not asked, because that's not the sort of interview that he is. But I went out to challenge him and say, hey, spreading misinformation is not helping America, and not a journalist being the best we can be in this important moment in American history. And it went from that into a more sort of ego contest, and that I was disappointed in myself that it became that. It shouldn't be about me. It should be about justice for the kid.
Let me take it beyond that one program and you here, because we're hearing a lot of people who are saying the media should get out of this now. The investigation is underway, and that somehow the great work of so many who have said, listen, we don't know if this man is guilty or not, but we know there are legitimate questions here who've come forward, like the Reverend Al Sharpton, are being criticized here. On a national scale, what is your take here? Are we supposed to back out now?
No, look, journalists can have an opinion. That doesn't mean you're not a journalist. We sometimes can become advocates for what is right when we see that the voiceless need a voice. We can be that, as we talked before about in Hurricane Katrina. Many journalists from many different networks were down there saying, hey, the right thing is not happening. America, government, we need to intervene here. People, Americans, are dying and being treated like they're, you know, worthless. And those moments happen every once in a while where the media needs to stand up and shine a light on something that's wrong and not stand back in a sort of Pollyanna way and say, like, well, you know, we're going to be objective and we're going to see both. Like, no, you know, there is a clear need for the media sometimes to be advocates, and this is definitely one of those situations. We would not be here with the FBI and the Department of Justice digging into this case if not for the media, and I mean the traditional media as well as media in terms of people speaking out on Twitter.
You're not saying advocate for one side or the other. You are saying advocate for the truth, advocate for what happened here. If George Zimmerman were injured in the way that he has said, then investigate the situation, investigate the video, which even the mayor of Sanford says the 911 calls, he wanted to release them, but the police, according to him, did not.
The justice system, the Sanford Police Department, arrived on the scene and decided we don't need to go any further with this. We're good. We're satisfied with what's going on. The media then picked up the investigation and did what the Sanford Police Department should have done in the beginning, and that is forcing the justice system to act in this case. That is righteous. That is what the media should do. This is a moment where the media has done the right thing. We're not saying he should be convicted. We're saying he should be tried.
And asking questions is not a rush to judgment. We are supposed to ask questions. Thank you, Toure. I think a lot of people also appreciated your apology on Twitter as you gave us, I guess, a self-analysis as well of how this is all playing out from your perspective. Thank you so much, Toure. Greatly appreciate it.